everybody. Well, we're about to get started here very shortly. We will have some special guests in just a minute to talk to us about an important ministry of the church. So I may stall briefly until they but today, I'm excited about today. We'll finish up our discussion on prayer today. So next Sunday, we will be back in Ezekiel. Okay, we'll be back after what was supposed to be like a month-long hiatus has turned into 2.5 months away from Ezekiel. But we'll be back with Ezekiel next week. And I am looking forward to that as well because Jerry's clearly looking forward to it because for the last 2 weeks he's been ready to go with Ezekiel. But we'll be starting in Ezekiel in the 30s. And this is really with all of the stuff that we've been doing in the fall, that is very lamentation and woe focus starts to change a little bit. And so I'm excited to dive back in and catch back up with where we are. But today we will finish up on prayer, and today is going to be a little bit of a miscellany. Okay, so if there are any kind of remaining or lingering topics or questions you want to discuss, we'll probably have a little bit of extra time to do that. The main things I want to discuss were 2 topics that were suggested at the beginning of this year. I asked everybody, well, what would you like to know or talk about? And those 2 things are the relationship between prayer and creativity. There were a couple of questions about that when I asked about prayer and art, prayer and music. So we'll talk about that a little bit. And then also prayer and pilgrimage, or prayer and place today. We'll also talk about the relationship between prayer and not just maybe pilgrimage sites, but also sacred space in general. And because in a way, that's actually sort of overlaid with the creativity discussion. We'll talk about that. Those are the main things I want to discuss today. But if there's anything else that you're still just burning to know or whatever, we can also talk about that. Or if there's anything we want to revisit from last week, because I knew that was a really rich discussion about the relationship between prayer and healing, and we can revisit that as well. So that's the agenda for today. And then, like I said, we'll be back in Ezekiel next week. Now, I'll talk about this a little bit at the announcements between the services today, but just a reminder, this is a really big week. Lent begins this week. So on Tuesday night, in this very room, we will, before we get Lenten, we will get shriven. And we're going to eat some pancakes. I'm very excited. Shrove Tuesday pancakes is by far my favorite church observance in the year. And I will be helping cook a bunch of them, so I'm very excited about this. My love language is cooking food for large groups of people. So anyway, but I'll be doing that. The youth always put this on. If you've been before, you know it's always very fun. Last year we played bingo, and they had some silly prizes and things. We'll be doing that again this year, so I'm looking forward to that. The youth actually do the bingo, and anyway, very fun, very fun. So there's information about that. There's a dedicated handout, which I see Tish actually has one, if you wouldn't mind sort of holding one up. You can see it's very colorful, you can't miss it. But there's also information in the rock about that. And then the very next morning is Ash Wednesday, and we'll have 3 services on Ash Wednesday, one at 7 a.m., one at noon, and one at 7 p.m., okay? The noon service will just be basically the liturgy of the word with the imposition of ashes. There won't be communion at noon, but there will be communion at 7 a.m. and 7 p.m. So if you want communion with your ashes, those are your opportunities, and then the noon is just no communion, basically. The 7 p.m. will have music as well. So if that's 7 a.m., perhaps unsurprisingly, it's just going to be like me and Duke, probably. It's 7 a.m. And whoever other very faithful souls are there with us. So,
actually, the adults today.
Yes! All right. Love that. So join us, and then for Ash Wednesday at any of those times. I know it's also Valentine's Day, but that just means you should get your ashes in the morning and go to dinner in the evening. But then the following week, our special guests are here. I'll save my announcement about the following week until after this.
Okay. We're briefly here as a field trip announcement. This is level 3 Sunday school. I'm Kylie Lee. I've been coming here since October. I'm teaching this class. We desperately need assistance. And the job of an assistant is literally just to come into the class and be a human body that sits there. You don't have to prepare anything. You don't have to talk. You just have to be an unrelated adult. You can't be married to me. Other than that, you just have to be a human person who sits there while these classes. And I should say, these kids are great. I have taught other kids before. Some of them was great. These are they are sweet. They are invested. They know their Bible. We're talking Old Testament. It's really a delight. So I just encourage you / plead with you to make it extra cute, which they already do. So you can sign up in the narthex or in front of our classroom to be an assistant sometimes. We beg.
Awesome. Thank you.
Now we're going to go to the class. At the same speed.
Yeah, I will say, like, the many hands make light work proverb is very true in regards to what we need with our children's ministry, is we need a healthy rotation of folks so that it's not burdensome on any one person. The idea is that we can rotate through classes and you're not, you wouldn't be obligated every single week, essentially. But we can only do that if we have adequate volunteers.
I taught last week and just was like, I'm like, oh, but there's a book, it's very simple.
There we
You
go.
make these copies, you go through this stuff, it tells you what to read, look at the timeline, it's anybody can get it.
Yes, he did a great job because I assisted him last week, and there's the lessons already prepared. There's always an activity, and as Kylan said, these kids know their stuff. They know their stuff, and they're engaged. They really want to know more.
Yeah, it's not babysitting.
It's not babysitting. We're not babysitting them. And he was asking tough questions, and they listen and they respond. And we've been doing this for a while, so please, they are engaged. They're like, yeah, what did Jalen say? Why, and what? So they really are involved, and they love it. That's the other thing, they enjoy it. So please.
Absolutely.
And there are vacancies at all 3 levels.
That's right. We
Level
need
1
about-
is 3 to 6 year olds, and they're using the Montessori program still, and only modified slightly. And level 2 is doing godly play, and level 3 is doing Bible study. And it's all 3 areas have holes and need people.
That's right. So pray on that.
And a DRE for next year.
Yes,
And
that's
he's going to
right.
lead
Yes,
the Director of Religious Education for next
Yeah.
year.
Well, we do have, so as part of the strategic plan that we'll be talking about later, after we talk about Ash Wednesday and the start of Lent, that there's plans for how to fix something.
Okay.
No spoilers. Okay. Anyway, I've got to have something to reveal, or else I won't be very
You
excited.
can always throw it on a seminarian.
That's anyway. But anyways, so going back briefly, Ash Wednesday is obviously on Wednesday. We do have, for any of the guys that are with us today, we will have another men's fellowship event on Thursday right after Ash Wednesday, which is never actually very Lenten feelings. I don't know what we're going to do, like grilled turnips. I have no idea. I have to do something that feels sparse, because we usually it's loads of food and it's great fellowship. But anyway, it just so happened that was that's hosted usually by somebody at their home, and so this month it's hosted by Chris and at their house, and so I'm very excited about that. So right after Ash Wednesday, we'll be down there.
You will be there, right?
I will be there.
Good, because I give up unblessed alcohol for Lent.
Oh, so I've got to pray over it. Okay, I see what you're saying. I see. So anyway, we'll do that on Thursday, and then next Sunday is Lent 1, which will start in Ezekiel, and then the Wednesday following we'll begin our Lenten Soup Supper series, which I'm really, really excited about. If you have not been in St. Richard's during Lent, or not been to that during Lent at St. Richard's, it's kind of a big thing. People really turn out on Wednesdays in Lent for soup. And last year, our first week, we had 80 people in here for the Soup Supper program. Last year's theme and study was called In the Wilderness, and we were looking at stories in Scripture, instances where God showed up to various people in various ways in the wilderness, and talked about. It's very discussion-based, that class. You do a lot of table discussion. And the format will be very similar this year, in that I will kind of help frame our discussion, and then really most of I leave lots of time for folks to talk at table, because that's really what people seem to want to do. The first year we did like a full hour-long program. We just wanted to talk to each other, which was great, so that's what we did. So we'll do that again this year, but this year's theme is called The Life Abundant. You've heard of it in the Rock. More information we'll put out about that this week in a standalone email. But it's all about how, as followers of Jesus, we are invited into a deeper and richer life than we could ever imagine. And each week we're going to talk about what it means to live as a disciple and take different topics. So I'm really excited about it. One of those weeks we'll talk about prayer, actually, and so some of what we've talked about in here will resonate, but it'll also be a little bit different in a different context. But anyway, I'm very excited about that this year. So that's going to be our Wednesday program. We will have a Eucharist at 5:30, soup at 6 to 6:30, and the program from 6:30 to 7. It's a long night. Some people only come to the Eucharist. Some people only come for soup. Some people come for the Massage program. Whatever works for you. But anyway, I'm very much looking forward to that as well. So, all right. Well, those are my housekeeping issues. Let's talk about prayer. Let's talk about it. So, as I mentioned, today I want to talk about prayer and pilgrimage, prayer and place, and also the relationship between prayer and creativity. We'll start with prayer and creativity, and then I think talk about pilgrimage and place, because those things are kind of related, as I mentioned. So, prayer and creativity, when we were talking about various topics back at the beginning of January, the sense that I got of this and what y'all had suggested, or the questions that y'all had asked, there were sort of two aspects to prayer and creativity. One of them was prayer and, we'll say, prayer and like artistic expression, maybe one way of putting it. So like, I wish she was here today. Robin Mueller, for instance, she paints, does watercolors, very beautiful watercolors. Tish does as well, yes, you're right. And Robin talked about in that day, the reason I thought of Robin is because she mentioned that for her, doing those watercolors is an act of prayer. Like that's so there's that sense in which prayer and creativity can be linked, but somebody also asked about the relationship between prayer and music. Prayer and artistic expression, we'll call it, to me is very linked with a lot of contemplative practice that involves praying with your body, okay? So if you think about, how many of you have ever prayed with a rosary, for instance? Okay, yeah. Or some people, anybody have a palm cross, like a cross that you hold in your hand? So there's overlap there with the same people who pray with the rosary. Yeah, or a rock, yeah. Sometimes people have a rock or like a token or something. And it's a very ancient thing to pray not only with your words, but to actually pray with your body in some way, to either be moving while praying or to have something you can manipulate with your hand that helps focus your intention in your prayers. And so that's really what the rosary is the beads basically are just helping you stay on task, in essence. It's a little more than that, but actually that's kind of what you're doing, right? And it helps to focus you and draw both your mind, maybe the words that you're praying, either out loud or maybe just silently, but focusing that and aligning it with the movement of your not.
Or walking the labyrinth.
Or walking a labyrinth, which is, that's gonna be the bridge between that and pilgrimage, actually. So, creative expression of any kind, or any kind of activity that focuses your mind in that way, I believe works very similarly when we're thinking about a prayer practice. So like if you paint, right, the way that you almost go into what some people refer to as this flow state, right, where you're just in the zone, you sort of lose track of time. Sometimes you sort of forget where you are, and you're just like locked in on whatever is happening. I believe is very much related to, again, the tactility of holding prayer boots or something like that. It's a way of focusing your energy and attention. But also, though, I think there is something that happens within us as creatures, created beings, whenever we create something else. I think that there's something very profound that happens there. In fact, actually, I believe that that's part of, not exclusively, but a big, big part of what it means to be made and created in the image of God, is that we have the capacity and the ability to be generative, to create something new, speak beauty and life into the world. Anybody who tries to create anything, whatever that may be, will know that it's always a lot harder to make the thing than it is to destroy a thing, right? It can take you ages and ages to work on a painting, but you can shred it in a second, right? And so I believe that there is something in the exertion of trying to create something beautiful that draws us closer to God, and relates therefore to prayer and how we relate to it. Because again, prayer is all about relationship. So yes.
You have to allow yourself to do. You have to give yourself permission, because when you're painting, you're pouring yourself into this. And revealing what's in you. It's okay to make mistakes, because it does happen. It's interesting how mistakes turn into something beauty. It turns into something more.
That's right.
What I was thinking about is that I was thinking about the Buddhist monks who do the sand models.
Oh, yes.
And they know that the whole, even though from the beginning they know the whole point of it is to show impermanence. And they make it, they finish it, and then it's gone.
Yeah. Have y'all seen, you know what she's talking about? It's like
They're
just
amazing.
incredibly, they're usually pretty large actually, these big either on a floor or this big dish kind of thing. And they make these incredibly intricate and beautiful patterns that take them days and days at a time. And then when they're done, they just sweep it away. And that's a perfect example. And Tisha, it strikes me too that everything you just said about your practice of painting are things that we've all discussed and said about prayer and the vulnerability that's there and the way that you have to open yourself to it. I mean, every bit of what you described, you could substitute prayer in there and it would have been something we've discussed in a previous week, which I think emphasizes this idea that prayer is not only words. Right? Prayer is also actions. It's also a posture of our inner life, maybe a way of putting that as well. And it opens up within us something unique in our physiology. So tying this back to Linda's talk on the relationship between our bodies and prayer and what happens physically when we pray. I think there is something when you get in that flow state, or you have to be, it is a discipline sometimes to put yourself there, right? You have to be open to doing what you're doing, try to be present to what you're doing in a very unique way. That actually does unlock different parts of your brain. Different parts of your brain are activated when you are doing that kind of work, whatever that may be, whether it's quilting, because I know Roberta loves that, yeah. Or painting or whatever, huh? I know. But don't think I haven't been thinking about that. We don't have a parish banner, friends, and we were just a diocesan council, and all of us were like, we need a banner. We've got to be able to march in here with a banner. I agree, so we're gonna have to talk about it. Anyway, no, you're right on, because that could be an act of prayer, making the banner. I mean,
Actually, so we,
Yeah, right.
we got to decide what to do.
That's right.
At the design.
Yes, that's right.
Pray about it.
So in any act of creation, I'm really focused on what you just said about it unlocks a different part of your brain. And it strikes me that in the same way that how do you know it's done, it almost speaks to acceptance of the imperfection of it's never really done. But we have to stop at some point.
Yes.
Right, we have to know when to stop.
Yes.
It's less about it's done and more about acceptance of your own imperfection and vulnerabilities.
Like the Amish, they always make a mistake intentionally. Because they want, they say that only God is perfect, which is true.
Yeah, I think that's very profound, Richard, because you're right. You can, if you can always add another little detail. You can always think, well, if I just one more little brush stroke here, this blade of grass, and then a little bit, and it does. Eventually, you just have to sort of decide this, whatever it is, whatever it looks like. And I think that is a deeply profound insight when we apply that to our life work program, right? That it is always in the process. Our spiritual lives are at least this side of the veil when they're finished, when they're complete. I mean, as Paul says, right, we on this side of things only see through a glass darkly. When the complete happens, that is when things will be fulfilled. So this also ties in very closely with the relationship between prayer and music. Music also unlocks certain parts of your brain. I found an interesting video, but it was like 10 minutes long, and I thought that's just a little too long for the day. It would take away time from our discussing, but there's a great video that Wired magazine did not that long ago about the way that music impacts your brain. And there's been a lot of studies on this, and especially, really, to me at least, very fascinating studies that have looked at folks who have lost significant cognitive ability, but yet their ability still to recognize music.
Yeah.
I mean, I think we probably all maybe even have an experience of this, right? Somebody who has dementia really bad or something like that, but then you put a song on from, decades and decades before, and something clicks about it, right? And there's something incredibly primal within our brains that connects to sound and to music. It's in a very powerful way.
We used to see that at the conference, where severely dementia challenged patients would sit there and we would play old Southern gospel music. And they would sit there and sing word for word.
Yeah, that's right. And they couldn't remember probably where they even were.
They weren't even sure what they had for breakfast.
That's right.
I used to, my mother-in-law, she had severe dementia, and she would be talking to me, and then she would just get lost. And I'd tell her, Billy, just sing it to me. And I'd give her a tune, just sing it, she'd be fine.
Yeah. I mean, it is truly amazing. There's been also some really interesting research done, and I actually heard it. So when I was in seminary,
Last week, yeah.
Yeah. Well, it was, I guess, 10 years ago now, dude.
Really? Wow.
Yeah. Well, that's what happens when the church sees fit to ordain you at 25. You get a lot of years when you're still a baby.
You're still there. Wait, you're still there. You're still writing your dissertation, right?
Well, technically, yeah, I guess I'm still, okay, fair enough. Well, back when I had to do my field placement, I did mine at the cathedral in Nashville, and they did a series one year as part of the Rector's Forum on death and dying. And it was so fascinating. Sounds like very dour and sad, but actually it's really wonderful. And they had a rabbi come in one week and talk about Jewish practice around death and grief and mourning, and it was just incredible. But one of the parishioners there is actually, I don't know if they still are, that was a while ago now, but at the the time was actually the head of, I can't remember their exact title, but they basically were in charge, they were a medical doctor, but they were in charge of the palliative care sort of thing and end-of-life care at Vanderbilt. And he came in and shared all of this really fascinating research that was going on around music and its relationship to a good death. And it was, the research was just overwhelming, that playing music, hearing music, being surrounded by music as you died, helped you to die better. Your body actually died more peacefully. And they could measure the way that the people's brains and their heart rate, I mean, everything was just different. And it was just really, so there is this way, again, in which music taps into something deep within ourselves that is really, really powerful. Yes, Tiff.
Just tapped on. I was with my mother when she did that, and we were singing.
Yes,
Peace is flowing like a river, and it was awesome.
It makes a difference. I should have actually reached out to him. This was an oversight on my part. We may have to have Armistead talk about this. We have a person here, Armistead Grandstaff. Anybody know the Grandstaffs? Armistead and Leslie? Yeah, great couple. This is what Armistead does actually professionally, is he works for a hospice network here doing end-of-life care, but he does music. That's what it is.
There's an organization in Austin, and it's called Swan Songs, and now it's starting to spread. And they grant musical wishes to people who are end of life, and it's of no cost to the family or the facility, but basically you can call and have arrangements and any kind of music you want. They'll have somebody out there regardless of where it is. It's a wonderful organization.
Yeah, I mean, it is really incredible. And so I think because of this, even when we couldn't measure it, even when we didn't have the tools to know really much of anything scientifically about our brains, we intuited this as humans. And most prayers, in almost any tradition, are always sung. I mean, they are. It's a relatively recent thing that you'd say your prayers as opposed to singing your prayers. You think about the Psalms. The Psalms are really not meant to be said. They're literally being sung. So we should be singing the Psalms. But some people get a little testy about that.
It reminded me of one more thing on the choir, when I was singing in the choir. We had a choir, Fred. I can't remember Fred's last name, but he became ill and went into assisted living, and it became hospice. And our choir went to him.
Oh, that's beautiful.
And we sang hymns, whatever we were singing. And it was just something really, I won't forget it. It was so good.
Absolutely, yeah.
My husband was at a church in San Antonio, St. Paul's, which was the high church of San Antonio. And the rector always had to chant the service.
Yes.
He learned to chant at Seminary of the Southwest.
Yeah.
And he was able to use it there.
Yeah, I mean, now it really, anytime like the liturgy is chanted, it is a marker of a sort of higher church sort of piety, which is really more of a lingering inheritance from the Reformation, where some of that stuff got coded as too Catholic and therefore bad. But there was a reason that you chanted the prayers. There was a reason that the liturgy was sung, is because it did something different to you to do that, right? The experience of that was different. I mean, it's why music has always, in some form or fashion, been a part of worship, unless you're the Church of Christ, in which case, maybe not so much. But song is a very, very powerful way to connect with something outside of ourselves, something transcendent. And so how all of these things converge, therefore, is I want to be mindful of our time too, because if we have a baptism today, I kind of go talk to the family. But so thinking about, therefore, these ways that different parts of our bodies are unlocked or respond differently when we are doing things with our bodies when we pray, when we are singing or whatever. All of this to me comes together when we talk about pilgrimage and prayer in place. So pilgrimage has long, in a number of religious traditions, been a facet of religious observance, right? That there is a place, a holy site, whatever that may be, that people travel to experience, to see, to be a part of. And that has certainly been a major facet of the Christian faith from a very, 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 very early on. It became very, very popular in the Middle Ages. There was a huge industry around, I mean, there's still technically a huge industry around religious pilgrimage, but there's a big proliferation of this. You'd go everywhere. It's why the Canterbury Tales, the whole setup is they're about to go on pilgrimage, right? It was just the thing you did, you know? It'd be like today if you wrote a road trip comedy or something like that. That's what the Canterbury Tales is. But then the road trip you took was pilgrimage. And the thing about pilgrimages, has anybody ever been on one, by the way? Have you ever been on, like, something that you would call like a true pilgrimage? Yeah. Anybody? Okay. Yeah, so I mean, there's a number of these. You know, like the very popular one. I don't know a clergy person who's gone on sabbatical who hasn't walked Camino. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's like the thing to do. The Lilly Foundation probably hired a dream. They're like, another, wow, man, come on, figure it out. Do something. But it's in France and Spain.
It's 500 miles.
It is very, and to do the full thing is long. Yeah.
Just a thought of
France and Spain, yeah. It technically starts in France, but
My niece and nephew did that just last summer, and their family.
Mm-hmm.
It
Yeah, so there are a lot of reasons that people will travel to a place. Sometimes it's because somebody is buried there. Sometimes it's because something happened there. So the most obvious of these would be places in Jerusalem or whatever where, you know, or going to Nazareth or something, right? We would go there because of its association with Jesus, right? But there are pilgrimages to all sorts of places, and even pilgrimages that have happened in more recent times, or happened is a weird way to say that, but, you know, like, I think of Lourdes, for instance, like, people go, like, these are more recent places people go to, whether somebody had a vision or somebody was healed somewhere, or like this water seemed to do something to this person. It becomes a pilgrimage site, a site of devotion, right? People will go there. And a big piece of pilgrimage is not just about going to the place or arriving at the place, it's also about traveling to get there, right? That a lot of the prayer that takes place is really the journey, not the destination. And so, similar to praying with your body if you're doing a rosary or painting the thing that you're doing with your body in pilgrimage is traveling, typically walking. I don't know a lot of people who would say I did on a pilgrimage and I drove my car to it. You know, typically, even now in the modern era, we still associate pilgrimage with having to do something with our body, right? Having to do something with our feet. I think the reason is because we intuitively understand that that's part of the practice. That's part of the practice of prayer and pilgrimage is that. So you get things springing up like labyrinths, like we have over here next to the Memorial Garden, which is basically like a little mini imaginary pilgrimage, right? You can walk the labyrinth while you pray, and it has that same kind of quality to it, right? Being on the journey. And some people find that to be a deeply, deeply helpful prayer practice. You know, walking labyrinths. There are people who just really are into walking labyrinths. There was a whole community in the Diocese of Alabama that was all about it. We had this giant traveling labyrinth that would go from parish to parish. And they made these little clay tokens, basically, that were the labyrinth, but, you know, silver dollar size, essentially. And you would carry one around, while you walked the labyrinth. So these things these are very, very, very ancient, long-standing practices in the life of the church, to do things like this. Now, oftentimes when you go to a pilgrimage site, when you do arrive at the destination, there is something there, right? Like if you do walk the Camino, the thing at the end is this gigantic monolithic church in Santiago, right? With a thurible the size of a fishing boat that they push through the church and incense goes everywhere. It's like literally it's the size of this table. It's huge. You can look it up on YouTube.
Yeah, it's on YouTube.
Yeah.
Every verger knows how to find it.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's right. It is gigantic. It is hung by a chain from the ceiling of the church, and it's just, yeah. So anytime if you don't like incense at St. Richard's, go watch that video and you'll feel better about what we do. We don't do that, so it's okay. But oftentimes, right, you will end up in a site where a church has been constructed, and the architecture of that place, the beauty of that place, the creation of that place is actually part of the facilitation of your prayer and spiritual practice while being there, right? I mean, we could do, and I would love to at some point, because this is what I love to study in college. I love, like, sacred architecture. It's very, very interesting. And the how you read sacred buildings and the story that they tell you just by the way they're designed and the theology that's conveyed in the construction of a holy site is actually part of that experience of prayer. You know, and I don't know if y'all, I mean, actually this may be the story of many people, not everybody around the table, but a lot of people that I talk to, I mean, I do talk to myself, but I was going to say myself included, all the people I talk to, myself included. But when I meet with somebody who, for instance, has found the Episcopal Church or something like that from the old tradition or whatever, a lot of times one of the things that they will say to me is, and the beauty of the church itself just spoke to me, or the beauty of the liturgy spoke to me in a way, right? That there was this kind of aesthetic experience that was tied into the prayers that conveyed something very deep. And that was definitely my experience. I grew up in a megachurch where we worshiped in a very large, basically concert venue, right? With 3 jumbotrons and a giant stage and the whole deal, right?
It's diocesan convention.
Yeah, every week. It was diocesan convention minus communion. And with a lot more praise and worship. And a longer sermon. All of that.
Always a long time.
Yes, always, always. Well, that's the only thing you got. You got to make it 45 minutes, you know. So, and even though actually I had a perfectly fine experience growing up in church, there was something about it to me that I was like, this doesn't feel very churchy.
Yeah.
There's nothing wrong with that, I don't think. I mean, I think it conveys certain things about your theology, the important things of the preacher, and they're so important you need to see them on 3 giant screens, right? So I think there is something being communicated there. But I was just really hungry for something that felt ancient. You know, I was supposed to be part of a 2,000-year-old tradition, but I wasn't feeling that anywhere, you know? And I remember the first time that I walked into a more liturgical church. It was not an Episcopal church initially. And just the beauty of it, the care and the iconography and everything that was, I mean, anyway, it drew me closer to God in an unexpected way. And that was part of the experience of praying in that space. And so, in a way, I mean, any church you go to, I mean, in a way, every Sunday is a little mini pilgrimage. We all have to travel to get here, you know, we do it every week. There's, you know, always on the journey, never finished, right, always going. But pilgrimage certainly works this way because typically at your destination, you're reaching a place that is also part of the experience of pilgrimage. So there's a way in which, again, creativity, artistic expression, song, movement, embodiment is all connected in these 2 things and is also a part of prayer and what can look like a healthy prayer practice. Because we tend to think of prayer mostly as like, again, saying your prayers, you know. And the most we do with our body tends to be kneeling, you know. But there is a lot more that, one of the saddest things to me, and then Tish, I saw your hand. One of the saddest things to me is when I hear folks who, like they, and this is a lot of my friends that I had growing up, they find something just opened up for them in like doing yoga or something like that, which fine, that doesn't make me sad. What's sad is that they feel like their tradition didn't have anything like that. And that's the part that makes me sad, because I'm like, no, actually, Christians for a long, long time prayed with their bodies, maybe not exactly in that same way. But it's just like, man, we've really lost the plot if we can't claim what is part of our tradition too. And so yoga's fine, that's not what I'm saying. But what makes me sad is when it's like, wow, this is not seen as something that we do, you know? When in fact, praying with our bodies and embodiment in prayer is a huge part of what we do.
Yeah.
Anyway, yes. Oh, sorry, Tish was first. And then.
I want to do because of Kairos that's coming, but for Seal, definitely all of
Oh, sure, yeah, that's right.
it, and spiritual music and the prayer and bringing others to Christ.
Yeah.
I would strongly encourage if we haven't been, it still goes on, I can't help.
And we were talking about that earlier. So, what
Going up to the altar for communion is more meaningful. It's like a mini journey, I guess, in a way, rather than being served at your seat.
Sure. Yeah.
I mean, it's harder to get in the focus for me now that I've become an Episcopalian. When I visit other churches, it's just passing the seat. It's just
Well,
it
yeah.
doesn't have
Yeah.
the same meaning.
Sure.
Although I mean, it really does, but it doesn't feel. I guess that's what I'm trying to say. It doesn't feel the same.
Well, they just do it in memory anyhow.
Well, yeah, that's true too. There's a lot that
We can do
sometimes
that
is the
too.
same. Yeah.
I visited my son's church out in Phoenix, and on the way in, the ushers had baskets of what looked like coffee creamers.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, and there's grape juice in the bottom. The first peel you peel off has a little piece of bread in it, and then below that you peel off, and there's a little bit.
I've heard of that.
And it was, okay, folks, we're all going to take communion. Now open the top. I mean, that's the whole ceremony to it.
Yeah.
It just didn't do it for me.
Yeah. Well, because again, like the embodiment matters, right? And I think like the opening of a coffee creamer is not usually where I feel closest to God, you know? Yeah.
I'm not having any communion at all.
Yeah.
My coffee is very holy, so.
Well, I mean, so coffee, this is not a bad rabbit to chase actually, because, because there is actually a whole, like coffee people, like people who really love coffee, it's the ritual of it too. Like, back before it was toddler time, I would even, a lot of times, in the mornings, unless it was, usually I didn't do this on Sundays, but, if I had the time, I have a little Chemex like pour over, and I would make my coffee that way, and it does take a while, because you gotta sit there, and you gotta let it bloom, and then you wait, and you do this thing, and you do it again. And the coffee does legitimately taste better that way. But it was also just about the ritual of doing it. And there was something in the ritual of having to make coffee that way that felt different somehow and more grounded and more connected to something than hitting the button on my coffee maker like I do now, where I just pour the water in, and it beeps and goes.
But if I don't get my coffee in the morning, it becomes very unholy.
That's right. It has to be received. However it is received, it must be received. But yeah. But I think, again, though, it goes back to this point of, I think intuitively, we pick up on this in various parts of our lives. Like, we understand that ritual is important and has some kind of centering quality to it, even if we're not consciously thinking of it as prayer. I think we just pick up on this. We certainly do always. I think music's easy because when you listen to a song that's just deeply moving to you, and that sensation of the little pricklies on your neck and stuff like that. I mean, that's part of this, is that music taps into something. But we often don't think of it in those more mundane tasks in our daily life, where I think we still pick up on the fact that the ritual, the movement, the embodiment, in whatever it is.
And that's part of the beauty of our worship service. I get people from other, family members from other denominations or non-denominationals that come and visit, and they say, well, but you do the same thing all the time. It's so repetitive. There's no freedom of expression. I say, well, there is in the ritual. It's comforting, and it emphasizes more than just doing an ad lib every weekend.
Yeah. Well, and this is what I find so silly about that in particular, is everybody does the same thing every week. Like, when I was a Baptist, we did the same thing every week. That's a liturgy. It's just not one that involves the sort of ceremony that we do. Carly grew up charismatic, sort of a Pentecostal adjacent. Those people literally run around in circles during church. They do the same circles every week. At the same time in the service, you come to the appropriate time when the Spirit's supposed to be invoked, and somebody's going to throw their coat and just start going. And that's still liturgy, right? Like, so it always makes me, I get kind of worked up about that, because I'm like, we all do the same thing every week. It's just what you're doing. That's the difference.
And how can yours be so structured? And then I said, look at your service, stand back and look at what you do on Sunday morning.
Oh yeah.
It's well planned out and structured.
Oh yeah, like if the pastor had stood up and gave the sermon first, before we'd had 5 or 6 worship songs, somebody'd be like, what is wrong? You know what I mean? Because there's an order to it, right? It's supposed to be done. So
Did he keep raising her hand down there?
oh yeah.
I was just gonna add to that. I did grow up in the Episcopal Church. I grew up like Carly, and sometimes the worship alone is the sermon.
Yes.
I find it, for me,
that's
right. And when it comes to, I also attended churches mega churches where they do pass the basket around with the, and my interpretation of that is that it may not be as perhaps meaningful for some people because it doesn't seem intimate, but my understanding of taking communion is whether it's giving that way in the basket or whether going up in front, you have to allow yourself to receive God. And it doesn't matter how you receive it, it's you allowing yourself to receive God's word who you are. And so when I used to get it from the basket, I didn't see it as opening up a coffee creamer. I saw it as, okay, am I ready to receive this?
Yes.
I'm going to reach my hand in this basket, and there's something significant in there. And then I have to bring it up to me, and I have to get myself together, and I have to receive God.
Well, that resonates very deeply with what Tish said at the beginning about painting, right? And opening herself to, I think the phrase you used was very similar, like allowing.
You gotta give yourself permission.
Yes, give yourself permission. And I think that in and of itself, anytime you are making that conscious choice in some ways, that is a posture of prayer. Right? That is a prayerful posture. Anytime you simply say, it's sort of, what you hear Isaiah say, here I am, right? We're about to, this will pivot nicely to talk about Ezekiel next week. That's what the prophets do. We talked about this with Mary, right? When Gabriel comes to her and says, this is what's going to happen. And she says, what have you to me according to thy word? That's that posture. I'm going to be open to receive something really important here.
Right. And it's the beauty of the Christian churches in total, that what feeds one person may not feed another, but we have different ways of expression that someone gets fed, and God will use whatever method He can to bring people to Him. And if it's the mega church that feeds you and brings you closer to God, praise be to God. And if it's a little chapel with 5 people that works for you, then God's using what works for them to bring whatever He can to bring people to Him.
That's right.
I always think of the scripture when I'm about to take communion. I always think about the scripture that says, if you are not, right with your brother, you need to go fix that before you are ready to take communion. And so I'm thinking back to what Tish said. It's kind of like you have to be ready in whatever form that's going to take. You have to be ready And, you know, it has been painful in my life when I realized there hasn't been too many, but the points at which I can't take communion. And I've sat there and said, I'm not really ready to take communion today.
I'm not in the right spot.
I'm not in the right spot. So.
Well, I actually think that's, and I'm not just saying this because I need to go talk to the baptismal family, but I actually think that's a really perfect and beautiful place kind of to leave us in this conversation about prayer. Because as I said at the very beginning, back in Advent 1, prayer is one of those things that we know it when you see it, but can be extremely hard to define, right? Because when you start to define it, you start to limit it a little bit, but prayer is extremely expansive. And the way that one person prays and connects with God may not do it for someone else. I'm not a very centering prayer kind of guy. I've shared that a lot. That's just not my preferred method. But you find the language or the space in which God speaks. And the posture in which you need to be to hear and receive, and try to develop that, right? To lean into it. Anyway, and that prayer doesn't just have to be the words that we say; it can also be actions that we undertake, the way we live. I mean, again, thinking back to week 2, living lives. Where we pray without ceasing necessitates that we be open to those ways of relating to God.
You know,
I do have to go though, because I'm on 6 minutes because of family's minute. But anyway, thank y'all. Y'all don't have to go anywhere.
I just wanted to share one thing. Go ahead.
Yeah.
When I was in Christ Church in Cedar Park, that time I was back in the mid-90s, and on the road on the way to the lake, and so it was kind of out in the wilderness more than anything else. And I used to get out there about 6:30 in the morning to walk as they had. And it's always been my observance that somebody else is walking with me there. You stay quiet, you know, in reverence with everything. So I heard, you know, a step behind him. So I just continued on. And I got to the center, and opened my eyes. There was a deer standing next to me.
Oh, there's a what? That's a deer.
The deer walked that black with me. And I reached out and rubbed his head, rubbed his ears. You know, and he nuzzled me on my leg. And it was just a real special moment.
Wow.
Yeah. But, you know, in their sanctuary, they have windows exposed, you know, they used to open the windows, they had chalice windows that roll out, and you could get a breeze in there, which was kind of nice, but it, you know, became a distraction because the deer would always be around. So you're watching the deer instead of listening to the sermon.
That's fine.
But that was a very special moment. And I just said, thanks, Lord, for showing up.